evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Mahoning Drive-In Theater, the largest single-screen drive-in in the United States. We're certainly glad you could be with us this evening, and don't forget the concession stand is open with all kinds of great things to eat and drink.
89.3 Mahoning Drive-In Radio, your old friend Virgil back for another exciting episode of the podcast. As you guys know, the only podcast dedicated to the love and revival of our beloved drive-in culture. Joined as always by my co-host and general manager extraordinaire, Mark. Say hello, my friend.
Hello.
Also with us tonight, three-headed beasts, we got Jeff, owner, projectionist extraordinaire at the Mahoning Drive-In Theater. Say hello, Jeff.
What it is.
I love that. Very excited for this episode as we kind of jump off the rails of some of the series that we've been hitting this year. Not necessarily shop talk, but certainly drive-in centric. And we love a story when internet does good and a passion project is seen through. And that seems to be the case with Mike Weatherford, who is the writer of Drive-In Kings 1977, the comic book, which is a 12-issue series, now being funded by Kickstarter. And Kickstarter is one of those things that when we were younger, the idea of trying to make a movie or a comic or a project, there always had to be this gatekeeper that allowed you in or saw your foot in the door in some sort of way. And nowadays, with things like Kickstarter, you can put an idea out there into the world and hope that people get behind it enough that they're willing to fund it. And that's the case. Mike, welcome to the show, my friend. Say hello.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Dude, so excited to have you. And the comic book is amazing. You sent over some copies of issue number 1. Why don't we go a little bit into where this idea of doing a comic book series started, and furthermore, what made you or inspired you to set it at a drive-in?
Well, it's a lifelong mania for the drive-in, and the project's been simmering a long time. But I guess like a lot of people, it took the pandemic and the lockdown to really make me sit down and attempt it. For people that don't know, I'm a longtime newspaper reporter and columnist and spent most of my career at the Las Vegas Review-Journal. So it got really easy to write column inches, but the whole bucket list idea of writing fiction was always still a little bit daunting. And when I left the newspaper, I was like, well, let's, you always drove up that highway and said if I didn't sit in a cubicle, I'd be doing this and this and this. So let's do some of it. And for some reason, although it would have been easier to do a prose book because it wouldn't have involved artists in Italy and Australia and all that, the comic book, I just kept going back to that, at this kind of 20-year-old idea that I had about this semi version of our teen selves getting whisked into the drive-in and all these genre movies.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously it's set at the drive-in. What was the choice of taking it back to such a specific era of the drive-in with the late 70s?
Well, a couple things there, and I'll probably ramble on the answer. One of them is sort of the subtext of the book, which will kind of emerge, hopefully, as the issues go on, that it's kind of set in the summer that Star Wars came out. And so the characters don't really realize it yet, and nobody really knows that yet how much Hollywood's going to change and how much things are going to flip and how the genre movies are going to become the mainstream movies. So along those lines, 1977, I remember it as one of those last years where there were still quite a few drive-ins and they were starting to close, but the ones that were left, there was kind of a split. Some of them went for the family audience and more like what the surviving drive-ins do today. But then some of them just went for, what's the right word, the grindhouse, or what I call the drive-in programming, just this alternative, psychotronic, whatever the right word is. I try to struggle for it. but you would open up the newspaper and just, teens like us would be just suckered in by those ads that usually promise so much more than they delivered.
Well, even in the 70s, it's one of those situations where drive-ins would either cater to families or they would cater to the alternative kind of teen crowd. Like you said, the grindhouse era or houses. And there is something magical about that turning point in cinema, as you're about to get to the big summer blockbusters and the shift kind of away from grindhouse and leaning more into blockbuster. But it's a great attitude for the characters to have. It very much is a dazed and confused kind of mentality where these guys are just living, and setting that at a drive-in is even cooler.
That's what I was kind of going for, is a little bit of that dazed and confused thing, because that was completely our era as well. And
Yeah.
the drive-ins we went to, because they were running the grindhouse quote quote type stuff, they were pretty lawless places. I mean, you could pretty much do whatever you wanted to there.
Yeah.
It wasn't always the same story as what we called the family drive-in, that was actually closer, but we never really went to it. But out at the drive-ins that kind of made that split and ran the drive-in stuff, nobody really cared what you did out there.
That's the beauty of it, the freedom of going to a drive-in versus an indoor house. It's night and day. I'm curious, on a creative level, a lot of us have ideas. A lot of us have dreams. Where do you go as far as, hey, I got this idea for a comic book, as far as a collaborative process to bring in somebody to draw those ideas and see that through?
That was the hard part of it, and that's why the first issue took 2 years plus, and kind of a lot of false starts and blind alleys. But yeah, I looked around and eventually just kept going to this Facebook site called Connecting Comic Book Artists and Writers, and tried it with one guy who did some good work, and some of his work still remains in the finished pages there. He gets like an additional art credit,
Yeah.
but we decided, it's just not quite there yet, and we found Francesco, a young guy in Italy who I doubt has ever been to a drive-in, but he gets lots and lots of reference photos.
Man, and it's incredible. It's so stand out. The art style, it sucks you right in. You sent along a couple of variant covers and they all just pop so hard. It really reminds me of that era in the 70s with movie posters and that type of detailed art. So well done on that front.
Oh, thanks. Variant covers are a big Kickstarter thing. Well, they're actually a big thing now in the mainstream comics too. But it was always my idea that we'd always at least have one variant cover that was a movie poster. And
Yeah.
so we did that on issue 1, and I think I specifically pitched it as being in the style of Crown International Pictures for
Love
that
it.
extra little joke.
Yeah.
But and the second issue is going to have one. It's not so studio specific, but
Yeah.
I love it. So
You can just tell there's so much love in these pages and so much passion for the same thing that we push for, that culture of the drive-in that's lost on many. So clearly you must have your past with the drive-ins. Why don't you get a little bit into what that spark was like as a kid and some of those choice experiences?
it's a through line of life, and I'm sure you guys have talked about on this show. It's a little bit hard to explain why it's so much in your DNA, but I have childhood memories of it, and I have like the Little League baseball team end of season party, going to see
Oh
the
yeah.
Planet of the Apes. I have I one of my favorite books. I had my Famous Monsters and my Famous Monsters magazines, and there was the Hammer movie, The Devil's Bride. It was The Devil Rides Out is the name of it, but it is retitled for the U.S. And it was the second feature but I knew that was going to be a real hard sell for the parents. But I pretended I really, really wanted to see the first feature. And so we went, and I thought I could talk them into staying, but it didn't work. So every time I see the movie, the opening scene is like an airplane landing and Christopher Lee looking with binoculars.
Yes. Yeah.
And so every time I see that movie, I just remember the car pulling out of the drive-in and turning on the road, and I'm
The
craning my
heartbreak.
neck out the window, and I'm seeing Christopher Lee with his binoculars.
Amazing. Yeah, and it is. It's one of those things that you really can't describe when it's part of your community and part of your culture growing up. And that's something that we're lucky to have been able to revive in our area, and lucky to have a bunch thriving in our area. But that is just part of the thing. It's where you go after a long night. It's where you go to celebrate a birthday. It's where you go. And it's really telling that was part of your experience. Were there any specific theaters that you went to that you remember?
Yeah, I didn't really want to say that the comic is set in any particular city because I wanted, like The Simpsons and Springfield, I
Every
wanted
town,
everybody
yeah.
to kind of have some ownership of it. But the screen is definitely the Admiral Twin in Tulsa because artistically, if you're just drawing a rectangle, it's not as interesting. But the Admiral Twin had those four like support beams or struts at the
Yeah.
top, and so I was having the artist always draw those in. The drive-ins that we caused most of the trouble are long gone, but the one was the Riverside and the other one was the 11th Street. The Riverside closed before we were even out of high school, to our dismay.
Yeah.
But the others held on a while.
Yeah, it's that's the hard thing about the drive-in culture is, most of our childhood drive-ins and happy places are long gone. And I just love that we're at a point now in culture, which is what we were talking about before you came on, where the drive-in is reinvading all different types of media and mediums now, with comic books and commercials and movies and everything else. It's something that's long overdue.
The only good thing that came out of the pandemic, right, was people had to go to
It's so hard to say. The pandemic was great for us.
It certainly helped.
Even the one here, which is First Run Drive-In, they were doing some pretty creative stuff. I mean, as they weren't going super far back, but we went out and saw a double feature, the first two John Wick movies. They were kind of forced to think outside the box a little bit.
It was funny for us because so many drive-ins were scrambling for content because the studios weren't releasing anything, and they were having to dip into retro and dip into indie stuff. And we didn't have to do anything different. We closed the snack bar, basically. We were already retro. So people were saying, is it really hard for you to deal with the pandemic? And it's like, well, not really. Not really, other than social distancing and closing the snack bar. We're doing exactly what we've always done and getting a whole lot of people who've not been to a drive-in either ever or in decades coming out to us. So yeah, it does seem weird to say the pandemic was very, very good for us, but it didn't hurt.
Seems to be the case across the board.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, clear love of the drive-in and love of the drive-in culture. So let's talk comics. You said you have the history being a writer, being a reporter and journalist. How do you get to comics? Is this something that you dabbled in at all in the past, or is this kind of the first jump out with it?
It is the first jump out. I've been a comics reader and a comics fan since I was in junior high, but that was another challenge, sitting down to try to write one. Like, how do you do this? Like how many panels per page, and how that was another part of the learning curve. I think the part that overlapped and helped a little bit was just as a newspaper reporter, you're not intimidated by sitting there in front of a blank screen and putting words on it. But it was intimidating to not be telling a true story or not having quotes, to actually write fiction for a change. Using the part of your brain that's not trained in the daily newspaper grammar.
No need to fact check as you're going back. You're like, I'm creating this out of the blue.
But the cult movies part of it, I have folded that in, and I did a book way back in 2001 called Cult Vegas, and the longest chapter is called The Las Vegas Drive-In, and it's kind of all about the Vegas-based movies, the cool ones. And so over the years, especially in the 90s, when we at the newspaper, we could just more do what we want to do without adult supervision. They, Ted Michaels lived in Vegas, and so
Right.
they did like a little Ted Michaels film festival, and they brought in Tourist Satana, and I'm like, oh, I'm writing
Wow.
a story about them for the newspaper, and then I'm saving those quotes and using some of them in my book.
That's
Wow,
right. You
that's-
had Ted Michaels and Ray Dennis Steckler in Vegas.
Yeah, they both lived there, and I did stories about both of them for the newspaper.
I always regret. I used to go to Vegas for the National Association of Broadcasters convention for several years through my previous job, and I always regretted not going to Steckler's video store when he was alive, because he had Mascot Video somewhere in Vegas, and you could just go and he'd be like working at the shop and selling his tapes and things like that.
Yeah, he liked to meet fans, and that, yeah, that is where I went and talked to him when I did that story. Ted was a character, man. He was fun. I miss both of them, but Ted was way more fun.
Yeah.
Did you go to the castle?
I did not. I think he'd already gotten rid of the castle by the time I talked to him. He had financial problems forced him to get rid of it.
Yeah, first thing to go is always the castle.
Yeah.
I'm so curious about the creative process and the collaborative process, again, not being the guy that's drawing and writing. So how does that work? Do you kind of come up with concepts and like, hey, this is what I'm thinking things will look like? Or do you give your artist a free rein to kind of come up with something to match your words?
Well, I told somebody else, I said the reference photos for this would make a great coffee table book, but no free rein, no free rein allowed. No, because he is a young guy and because he's in Italy,
Yeah.
you really have to explain this stuff. And so, like just earlier today, I was trying to find pictures of the dashboard of the Kingswood Estate station wagon.
Yes.
And
Great choice, by the way.
you can find this stuff, but yeah, I just thought the more specific it can be and the more specifically he can draw it and really remind people that the flashbacks are in 1977. And I said, like, boy, if I was making this as an independent movie, when they'd go to like the part that kind of pays tribute to Queen of Outer Space, you could switch to that film stock and you could switch to that makeup and those wigs and have the women, wear that color lipstick. But in a comic book, can we do this? And that's the part that I throw out, and you've got to give them some creative freedom and just say, hey, this is kind of an idea or something to keep in mind. But if you can't do it, no worries,
Yeah. Well, I'm very curious again about the process with Kickstarter. So you had a successful campaign with issue number 1. You're currently fundraising for issue number 2. Am I correct?
I'm going to launch number 2 real soon, like whenever you guys put this up.
Great timing. Yeah.
Yeah, number 1 was a learning curve, and I was totally new to Kickstarter. I didn't really understand it, still don't, but I'm learning fast. And yeah, we got there with some help of generous friends and family, including a lot of people that aren't into cult movies, and were just helping me out. But I'm told that that's common too for the first one. And then as you build momentum and the Kickstarter algorithm discovers you, then you connect with your real actual audience. And so I'm hoping that'll happen.
Yeah. Well, Mark put it perfectly. It's one of those things when you get to the end of this comic, you're like, all right, I want to know what happens next. And as a ongoing campaign, it kind of forces people to go, okay, I'll drop my money into the next issue, And you have great perks as well. Why don't you explain to the audience kind of how it works when you donate to Kickstarter?
Well, the big thing, I guess, on Kickstarter is the variant covers. People really like the variant covers, and I had four covers total last time. I'm having three total this time, and I'm dropping the price this time, and I'm dropping my fundraising goal. I got advice you can't argue with that said, your goal should be close to your actual costs. But I think like I did that on the first one, and I squeaked by, and I kind of got there. But on the second one, the goal is to really expand the readership and build the base. So most of the prices are cheaper on this, and the variant covers will be $5 less.
Oh, nice. Well, we know all about grassroots promotion. Even to this day, a big part of what we do is getting out there with the people, connecting with the potential fan base of the Mahoning Drive-In Theater. I imagine there's a lot of legwork that goes into just getting this Kickstarter campaign on people's radar. What has that been like?
You guys must relate to this. I was telling somebody, I really remembered something a Las Vegas magician said, and it was one of the second, third tier ones, not one of the big stars. and I said, boy, I don't know. This is so much work. You must. I don't remember exactly how I remember the answer better than the question, but I said something to the effect that, like, don't you get bored doing the same show every day? And they said, boy, that hour a day that I'm on stage is what I live for. It's all the rest of it that it's you got to go out and schmooze the ticket brokers. You got to buy the cab top ads. You got to
Boy,
do
is
all
that
the promotion.
relatable,
You
yeah.
gotta take care of this, take care of that. And I felt that way with this Kickstarter business. I was like, oh man, it would have been so nice if I could have sold this to Image Comics or something and just sat back and done the creative work and turned it in. But on the other hand, it's kind of fun to that kind of DIY indie rock thing.
Yeah.
Watching your documentary, I was like, this is weirdly parallel to fantasies that friends of mine had about the Admiral Twin in Tulsa during its more kind of benign neglect years. We were like, what if we just said, hey, we want to do an after hours rental, and if you guys just leave the bathroom unlocked, we'll plug an extension cord and we'll put my backyard projector on top of the car, and we'll project Star Crash on your screen for like our 50th birthday or something. We talked about it, we never did it, but that's as real as it got. But the fantasy was always like kind of what you guys were doing, and then we talked ourselves out of it. We were like, I don't think we think about this for 10 minutes. We'd realize how much work actually goes into it. But so I'm amazed that didn't stop you guys.
Yeah.
It's the nothing to lose mentality that really worked for us. We were really at a point where it's like, well, we can try anything, because it really felt like it couldn't get any worse, just as far as the support and love that we were getting from the studios, from the locals, everything else. So in a lot of ways, just like with your project, the limitations kind of start up that fire, and lead to the thing that ultimately makes that magic happen. And in our case, it's the 35 millimeter and the off the wall programming, playing what we like, that mentality. I know the guys have a lot of questions for you, but I'm so curious, being that you've spent so much time in Vegas. Any crossover with Jerry Lewis at any point?
Not really. It was amazing that he was one of the ones, and like you said, he lived here, that I didn't have more interaction with him, and it's hard to explain. Maybe subconsciously, I kind of avoided him. I don't know, but it was like our newspaper columnist was the guy that tried to buddy up with him more, and I'm like, that's fine, a lot of the interactions with the media, he just was kind of a mean old crank at that point in life.
we have such love for the man. It's it's something we always like to sneak in if it ever crosses the path in the podcast.
Boy, I thought I'd sit here and be able to tell you a story about any name you mentioned. And you mentioned the one where where I don't really have much. When I first moved to town, he and Sammy Davis Jr. did a team up thing at Bally's, and it was actually filmed, and there's a VHS of it floating around there somewhere.
I have that. Yeah.
After it was over, I got to shake the hand of Sammy for the one and only time before he died. But they were
Wow.
apologizing for Jerry. They were like, he's not coming out. He's mad about something. He didn't like the way something, some technical issue that he didn't, and sort of stayed that way over the years. He was always out of
He's still
sorts
mad about that
something.
tech issue.
That was one of my favorite things. I'm a fan. I know full well of the man's flaws, but one of the things I used to love about watching the telethon every year was, when is he going to get really angry at the crew about something? And it would never take very long. He would always do it on camera. He wouldn't wait until a break. He would always like berate people on camera. So yeah, probably, a timpani cue was slightly off that night, and you missed meeting the man in person.
Well, when I did throw $1 in the bucket at the telethon, though, that when I first
There you go,
moved to
that counts.
town, and you want to do all those Vegas kind of things, when the telethon was at the Sahara Hotel, people said, like, yeah, if you want to again, go like at 2, 3 in the morning. The lines are real short, and you'll get in. And sure enough, we did. And it was that sleepy hour. So that was the hour when he started doing his faces and running up and down the stairs with the bucket. And so we threw money in the bucket. So I do have that
Awesome.
for me.
So when you
Oh.
went in, so I'm going to totally derail this. So when you went into the telethon, this is the next 45 minutes of this conversation. When you went into the telethon, you waited in line until somebody left, and were you there in shifts, or did you stay until you just couldn't take it anymore?
As I remember, every hour there was a break, and those who had had enough could leave, and then they counted how many left, and they let that many people in. And by 2 or 3 in the morning, it wasn't a problem. Apparently, we got right in. That's all I
Like,
remember.
welcome. Well, before I turn it over to the guys, why don't you give the audience a breakdown of the story of issue number 1, which is out there now, and also how people can find and support this project?
Sure. Well, it is, as you might have pieced together by now, it's by 3 teens in 1977 between their junior and senior year. And they are at one of the drive-ins that kind of runs the drive-in stuff, the grindhouse stuff. It's very loosely supervised. So they are able to get a guy to buy beer for them at a convenience store after they pull one of their elaborate pranks that goes wrong. And then they go to the drive-in, but it turns out that this is the night that a buried alien that's been buried underground for 50 Earth years really can't wait anymore. His resources are running out. So he uses his dimensional transporter, and he sends them actually through the screen. So that's kind of what happens at the end of issue 1.
That's how you launch a story, baby.
Yeah, we were talking about this earlier. That kid fascination of opening up that newspaper and seeing the ads now that on Facebook groups like Groovy Doom. They show those ads, and they were sort of pop art in their own thing, and I was like, well, I mean, I know the idea of going through the screen in the original, Purple Rose of Cairo, things like that.
Yeah.
But if I don't make them literally going into the movies, because I'm trying to be a little more original than that, but it is a comic book, so you can have that vibe of that really exaggerated poster art.
Oh, it's perfect vibe. Well, I'll turn it over to Mark. Mark, I know you got some questions for our main man, Mike.
Just a few. First of all, I love that Scorchy is referenced as often as it is in the I have a poster for Scorchy, full size. It's just like this head to toe painting of Connie Stevens with a revealing dress and a pistola. So it was fun to see, because what I loved about this is that you reference a lot of movies that aren't the common movies everybody talks about. It's clearly a knowledge of deep cut drive-in movies, which I love. So seeing, what was it, Around the World with Fanny Hill, I think was referenced, and Scorchy and some stuff like that was just was just wonderful. I mean, these kids are who I would be if I was that age in that time. And it's funny to me too that we were talking about it. Basically, the whole scenario that is set up in 1977 at this drive-in in the comic is what most nights at our drive-in are like. Down to the
Yeah.
same movies, really. So it's universal in that, like, anybody who's a regular at the Mahoning would read this and be like, yeah, that's what it's like at our place all the time, minus the alien thing, as far as we know.
Yeah, so far.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
well, it's like
far.
we talked about, the ones that ran what I'd call the drive-in or the grindhouse stuff. They they might have been like a triplex or something, a mall theater or something that ran them, but basically they only ran at the drive-in. And the movies I was citing, I actually went back to microfilm from our era in Tulsa. I was like, oh, Scorchy, that's pretty cool. But also that's one that people get on this level that I'm trying to reach. A lot of those movies, they just retitled and they'd replace the title card, but they wouldn't replace the end credits. So on the double feature of the games girls play and the games boys play, we went out and watched it, and it was like, wow, this is actually a good movie. This is actually drawing us in. And then the end titles, it was Trip with the Teacher,
Oh,
which is pretty highly regarded now, and so it's like, well, no wonder.
a Crown International classic.
I don't know if this has already happened at the Mahoning, but if not, I'll just set you up so you can book it. There were these nights you just remember, and one of them, a story I probably tell the most. It was a movie that for years and years I'd never remembered what the movie was or what the title was before the internet made this stuff easy. And then even when the internet made it easy, I never really bothered to look it up. But we were out there watching this horror movie, and all of a sudden on the screen is the guy from Green Acres. So do you guys know yet what the movie is?
Is that Devil's Reign?
It's called The Brotherhood of Satan.
Yes.
So we're watching it, and somebody yells out, "It's Mr. Haney," and then somebody else goes, "No, it's Hank Kimball."
Hank Kimball, yeah.
Or there's a honk or two, and then there's a pause, and somebody else goes, "No, it's Arnold Ziffel." And so you hear the laughs and the car horns, and then car by car, the whole drive-in starts singing the theme to Green Acres.
No, come on.
Only at the drive-in.
You can't write that. It's too good.
Yeah, they were lawless places, like I said.
Yeah, I don't know what it was with Alvy Moore and Satanism, but he produced.
That was his second
Well,
career.
maybe not Satanism, maybe devil worship. Well, maybe not devil worship, but he produced a film called The Witchmaker, and he also, I believe, had a hand in producing or writing Brotherhood of Satan. So I don't know what it was with him in his own private life when he wasn't Mr. Kimball, but
Made that right turn.
that's always been a little weird to me.
Little suspect there, yeah.
The only question I have, other than just endless praise for this and not being able to wait to get the issue 2, as a reporter in Las Vegas, have you ever come across a series of killings where bodies were found drained of blood? Oh, no,
well,
sorry. That was the Night Stalker. Forget it.
I will answer that question with a little plug for another project. Every year, the Nevada's Humanities Council puts out an anthology, and this year's is going to be film themed. And I sort of write about how my fascination with Kolchak and the Night Stalker as a 12-year-old seemingly kind of led me to Las Vegas, and sort of how I never met Jeff Rice, the guy that wrote the source novel, but he kind of, his story was ultimately sad and didn't end well. So I kind of tell his story and try to tie all those together in this essay that comes out, I think, next month.
Ooh, I want to read that.
Yeah.
Because Jeff Wright was a reporter in Vegas, right?
Wow.
And that's
Yeah.
what inspired him to write that original novel.
He was, and he covered the Elvis Priscilla wedding at the Aladdin, and his dad was kind of in with the organization that was in control of the dunes. And
How about it?
Yeah.
Let you on your path. I'm
Wow.
telling you, inspiration. It's huge. What about you, Jeff? Any questions for Mike?
Not really, just an observation, because back in the mid 70s, I was a teenager. I was in high school. And I know what you mean about some drive-ins went family and some of them went the grindhouse route. And I remember those ones that went the grindhouse route. It's like the owners, they wanted to get everything they could out of them. I mean, who doesn't? You want to make as much money as you can, but like the drive-in was on the edge of failure, and they felt like, I got to take all this money out and save it for me and not put anything back into it. And we lost, like you said, we lost so many drive-ins beginning in the mid 70s is when they really started to close. My family drive-in, if you will, the Super Skyway, which was near Allentown, that closed in like 75, I think, something like that, 75. And they were taking all the money they could and not putting anything back into it. So year after year, the drive-in gradually wore down and wore down and wore down. And, oh, this year this is broken, the next year this is broken, the next year this, and they don't fix anything. And it just, they fell apart. They just basically fell apart. So, I know where you're coming from. I wish I didn't have to see that.
Yeah,
but that's what happened.
You guys were asking about how do you communicate with the artists, and that was part of the learning curve we all had with the artists using reference photos. But if I had it to go over again, I would like the drive-in to look more dilapidated and run down and beat up. We have a little of that in there, but I'd like to see more of that in there.
That's both part of that 70s appeal,
That's exactly. We were all part of that to some extent. I'm older than Mark and Virgil, but it was a shame. It was a shame. Great material for a comic book. I mean, I think they should look more dilapidated. I mean, I think that's great. But the fact that it happened in real life, that's kind of sad.
The Admiral Twin, my kind of heritage drive-in, the one that's still there and the one we sort of modeled the screen on, it was getting real sad until there was a fire and the screen burned, and it was one of those where it was two-sided screen and you drove in on either side of it, and it was really iconic.
Yeah.
And we were a little skeptical about whether the owner was like, oh gee, this is really sad, I guess we're out of business now and I guess I can move on. But the community came to the rescue, and I am a owner of the Save the Admiral Twin t-shirt, and they rebuilt, and it's cool, and you do kind of get the DNA of the imprint of the location, but it's otherwise it was kind of misplexing. I'm not sure how I feel about this. I looking up at this screen that isn't the same, and yet the old screen, the plywood panels we're getting further and further apart. You can see more between them each time you went.
Yeah.
More spaces. Yeah, that's what I understand is when they rebuilt it, it didn't look quite
it's not as big. It's I think it's shorter, and the concession stand's nice now, and the women's bathroom, I understand, is a big improvement, so nobody complains about that.
Yeah. Sometimes you get those upgrades and it's welcome, In that case, they were kind of back up against the wall with the burn. But before we let you go, so back to Kickstarter a little bit. What do you think are some of the pros and the cons of working in that platform, maybe versus the conventional route, which I guess would be like taking it to a publisher and having somebody just fund the project?
The pros and cons are kind of the same. I mean, you have to learn how it works, but if you do, there's no middleman. It's all you. You're kind of I'm kind of running a small business if this takes off and I end up doing 12 issues. You look on there and some people are making phenomenal amounts of money on these Kickstarter comics that I can't even imagine some of the smaller indie publishers are doing that well. But it's kind of like what we used to call the underground comics, or a lot of them are kind of sex comedy kind of things, and I guess not safe for work is the new buzzword. Mine isn't, by the way, but I mean mine isn't that raunchy. A little profanity.
Yeah, nothing
Near
that you
nudity.
can open
Yeah.
up in front of the kids and have some fun, Well, being that we are the drive-in podcast, leaning into the love of the drive-in culture, I know you may have thought about this many, many a time, but when people are put on the spot, it makes for a very hard answer. If you were able to take over the Mahoning or any drive-in for a night, what would be your go-to program, whether double feature or otherwise?
I think I tipped my hat earlier. For some reason, my high school buddies and me, Star Crash became our biggest fascination and one
Hell
of
yeah!
our favorite nights at the drive-in. I can't really explain it, but yeah, if there's any movie I'd like to see projected on a drive-in screen, that one's probably number one. But going back to some of those other memorable nights, I'd love to see Inframan on the big screen.
We just played
Just played it. Wow.
Oh man, I'm kind of happy I didn't know or been so tempted to try out for that.
The fear of missing out. I get it. Yeah.
And I think the young people don't understand the lengths we went to see nudity. I mean,
Yeah. It would be before the age of the internet. It's like,
Yeah,
Hey,
I mean,
it's supposed to be an art film, but you know what art means, right?
boobies.
I don't. It's a whole nother conversation. I don't want to make it sound like it's a good thing that porn is so readily accessible on people's phones for young teens now. But for us, again, when I look through those newspaper ads, and there's all these movies that I'm sure your listeners might know what they are, but like Voluptuous Vixens 76 and Bed Bunnies, they were just retitles of these European sex comedies, and you had to sit through a lot of comedy to get a little bit of softcore action there. But the one that was one of our immortal nights that definitely was the exception to that rule was Revenge of the Cheerleaders.
Nice.
So,
Oh yeah.
Featuring
was
David
great.
Hasselhoff as
Yep.
Boner.
as Boner, yeah.
That title card's getting some honks without a doubt.
So if I was gonna pay homage to that whole softcore genre, that would be the top of the list for that one.
Oh, that is so great.
Revenge of the Cheerleaders is fun. It's like this wacky, absurdist comedy. It's got the nudity and all that too, but it's like a Mad Magazine parody of a cheerleader. It's really pretty fun.
I mean, it's got a kind of a manic energy to it, and so many of those, including Around the World with Fanny Hill. I mean, you watch them on YouTube or something nowadays, you can't finish them, but there was something about Revenge of the Cheerleaders was sort of rock and roll high school in a way.
It does have that same vibe to it, really.
Yeah.
Good double. Well, again, why don't you let people know where they can find you specifically, whether it's to give you a follow or to back the project?
Okay, yeah, I created a Facebook page for the book with the title Drive-In Kings of 1977. And then, yeah, very soon, hopefully by the time people hear this, I'm going to launch the campaign for issue 2. So you just go to Kickstarter and on search, you type in the title. And I think by the time you get done typing in Drive-In, it shows up.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
This is the exact thing
Cool.
that I imagine people, as they're hanging out, listening to the pre-show radio show at the Mahoning, are thumbing through and enjoying. It's just a perfect kind of capture of a time that we are striving to keep alive at the drive-in. So well done with this, my friend. And I can't tell you how much of an inspiration this whole thing is. That's the big plus of our podcast and the documentary and the story getting out there, is people are now fueled. Their fire is fueled by us following our passion and following our hearts, and seeing somebody like yourself not waiting for somebody to open that door or fund that project, but going after it. It really does fuel our fire as well.
Yeah, there's definite overlap there. I guess, we share your fantasy. You guys made it happen, and if we don't have either the ability or the whatnot, the means to operate a drive-in, this is the next best thing.
And you're in Vegas, right?
I am, yeah. The Joe Bob thing is next month.
That's right.
Yeah.
Man, good timing.
Oh yeah,
That's
that's right.
right.
He's in
Yeah.
Vegas this
Well,
year.
we got to
Yeah.
figure out a way to get you out to the theater, because that, more than anything else, reading this puppy, you're clearly one of us, and you'll be right at home at the Mahoning Drive-In without
Oh,
it.
this really motivates me now. I'm really
Yep.
happy the Las Vegas Drive-In is here, and I'm happy the Joe Bob thing's coming here, but I'm real curious about how it's going to work. But we won't knock having any drive-in at all. But boy, that one's been tough over the years. The North Las Vegas airport completely surrounded it. I'm sure tried to buy them out several times, and the
Yeah.
light pollution is bad. And like I mentioned, the police helicopters. And the one good thing that happened, though, if you'd taken a futures bet when they built the Fiesta Rancho Casino like 20 years ago, we all said, okay, well, this is now the rents are going up in the neighborhood, and this is gonna make the drive-in land even more valuable, and the drive-in's going bye-bye. And then the weird twist ending is that the casino never reopened after the pandemic, and they ended up just bulldozing it to eliminate.
Wow.
Yeah, they didn't want to. They haven't. The same company has another one a few miles up the road, and they didn't admit this, but they didn't want to sell it to somebody else and have it
Direct
competing with them.
competition.
So they
Sure.
just bulldoze it. So there's a little
Yeah,
less light
yeah.
pollution out there now, but Joe Bob people could have just stayed there and walked across the street with a lawn chair if they want. Not anymore.
Yeah. Man, oh man. Well, thank you so much for this project. We're so looking forward to issue number 2. And you'll have to, I know you sent over some key art, but we're going to put together a little slide for you so we can get it up for our pre-show that kind of draws the audience to this project, because more than anything, we want to have that 12-book compilation reach its end and be able to see this story through.
Oh man, that is so awesome. I really appreciate that. I have covers. I have the covers now, all 3, so I'll make sure you get them.
Oh, that's so great. Well, keep doing what you're doing. We love
Great.
you. Keep loving the drive-in, and can't wait to see what the next project brings.
That's awesome. Well, I'm gonna stick to it. I think if the people I trust that know more about Kickstarter than I do say you're off to a promising start, and the snowball's only going to grow.
I love that. Well, we're going to help it grow as much as we can.
Oh, thanks so much.
All right, my friend, be well. And on that note, Jeff, take it away, my friend.
Ladies and gentlemen, thanks again for coming out tonight to the Mahoning Drive-In Theater. We hope you'll come back and see us again real soon. The exit is on the right-hand side of the screen at the front of the field, and most importantly, have a very safe trip home. Good night, and God bless you.